Born in 1829 Gila River country in present-day Arizona, Goyaclo, or One Who Yawns, grew up among the Bedonkohe subsection of the Apache Chiricahua tribe, becoming an accomplished hunter and fearless warrior by age 17. 5 years later, Geronimo returned home from a trading trip to find his wife and 3 children slaughtered by Mexican soldiers under the command of Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco, burning his family's belongings according to Apache tradition, before retreating in wild grief into a nearby forest, where a spirit voice told him that no gun will ever kill you. I will take the bullets from the guns, and I will guide your arrows. After Geronimo hunted down his family's killers, he devoted the rest of his life avenging white and Mexican settlers who had forcefully usurped ancestral Indian lands. After Mexico ceded much of the American Southwest to the United States following their defeat in the Mexican-American War, Apache ancestral homelands were further threatened by the Gadsden Purchase of 1854, escalating Geronimo's attacks on white and Mexican settlements to a fevered pitch. Escaping the San Carlos Reservation 3 times over the next decade, Geronimo's knowledge of the surrounding countryside allowed him to elude capture following each of his raids, proving a major embarrassment for politicians and U.S. Army leaders alike. Wounded multiple times, Geronimo's ability to evade capture made him a newspaper and dime store novel sensation throughout the nation's steady westward growth. After years of raids against Mexican and American settlements, many times involving the deaths of civilians, in March of 1886, General George Crook forced Geronimo to surrender, only to escape yet again under the cover of darkness. His escape would again prove embarrassing to the U.S. Army, who assigned 5,000 U.S. soldiers and 3,000 Mexican soldiers, nearly a quarter of the U.S. Standing Army, to the objective of apprehending or murdering Geronimo and his followers. 5 months later, Geronimo turned himself in to General Nelson Miles at Skeleton Canyon, Arizona, followed by his imprisonment for the remainder of his life, save for the occasional government-approved trips to World's Fairs, Wild West shows, and the inauguration of President Teddy Roosevelt. He passed away from pneumonia on February 17, 1909, just 15 years before the end of the American Indian Wars. Today on the Daily Dose, Pontiac's War. Just as the French and Indian Wars ended in the early 1760s, Native American tribes took exception to their new British overlords, who they deemed less conciliatory than their French predecessors. Fed up with harsh British treatment, Ottawa Chief Pontiac formed an alliance with nearly every tribe from Lake Superior to the lower Mississippi, with the unified goal of expelling the British from formerly French-occupied lands. In April of 1762, Pontiac convened a war council on the banks of the Ecorse River near the settlement of Detroit, where he detailed his plan that each respective tribe should seize the nearest British fort to their encampment before wiping out the now undefended settlements that surrounded each British outpost. Amongst the assembled chiefs, it was decided that Pontiac and his warriors would approach the British fort at Detroit under the guise of negotiating a peace treaty, instead gaining access to the fort's arsenal, which would effectively arm the alliance tribes with the necessary weapons of European warfare. British Major Henry Gladwin caught wind of the impending attack, forcing Pontiac and his men into a fallback position of time-honored siege. At the same time, the Delaware, Shawnee, and Seneca warriors began their own sieges against various forts and outposts in Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, setting off a wave of collective trepidation for British forces pinned down in each respective fort. Months of standoff would follow, until on July 31st, a British relief column attacked Pontiac's camp in what became known as the Battle of Bloody Run, suffering heavy casualties that forced the expedition into retreat, but not before successfully supplying the beleaguered fort with reinforcements and badly needed supplies, which in turn allowed the British to hold out well into the fall. While major forts at Pitt and Niagara held out as well, 8 others fell to Pontiac's forces, wiping out all British occupants within before murdering a substantial number of the civilian occupants in frontier settlements surrounding each fort. By the spring of 1764, a total of 900 British soldiers and colonial civilians had been murdered, while an additional 4,000 civilians had fled for their lives. That same spring, under the command of Colonel Henry Bouquet, 2 British armies were sent into Pennsylvania and Ohio, while a third under the command of Colonel John Bradstreet swept into the Great Lakes region, forcing the Delaware and the Shawnee to sue for peace. Unable to convince the French or tribes in the West to join his rebellion, Pontiac signed a peace treaty with the British in 1766, before he was murdered by a Peoria tribesman while on a visit to Illinois. Pontiac's death led to bitter warfare amongst Native American tribes, leading to the near extinction of the Peoria, while proving to be a bitter irony to Pontiac's original vision of eradicating the British from Indian lands. Today on the Daily Dose, Red Cloud's War. After gold was discovered near Bannock, Montana in 1863, pioneers John Bozeman and John Jacobs developed the Bozeman Trail from Fort Laramie north through Powder River country east of the Bighorn Mountains, which saw steady encroachment by Euro-American miners and settlers on lands once the exclusive domain of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people. And despite several attempted treaties in 1866, Chief Red Cloud of the Oglala Lakota saw the treaties as weak and unacceptable, leading to Red Cloud's war against U.S. government forces. In a series of hit-and-run guerrilla-style attacks, the summer of 1866 proved to be a bloody one for U.S. forces stationed at Fort Laramie and 2 other outpost fortifications. And when Captains William Fetterman and James Powell arrived at Fort Phil Kearny in November of 1866, inexperienced fort commander Colonel Henry Carrington ordered Fetterman to provide relief for a wood train under persistent attacks by Red Cloud's warriors. When Fetterman's men encountered a Lakota decoy party, including Oglala warrior Crazy Horse, many standing on their ponies waggling their bare butts at the troopers, Fetterman took the bait and chased the Indians into the Pino Valley, where Fetterman's entire 81-man force was wiped out by an estimated 1,000 to 3,000 concealed Indians. Other skirmishes followed in the summer of 1867, including the Hayfield and Wagon Box fights. But when the U.S. government estimated that some 20,000 soldiers would be required in the defense of both the Transcontinental Railroad and the Bozeman Trail, they chose a peaceful go-around by signing the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie with Red Cloud and other tribal leaders, which in turn created the Great Sioux Reservation west of the Missouri River, including the Black Hills of South Dakota. The treaty also affirmed the Lakotas' continued hunting rights in western Kansas and eastern Colorado, making Red Cloud's War yet another bloody chapter in more than 300 years of conflict between Native Americans and westward expanding settlers. Today on the Daily Dose, Tecumseh. Born in 1768 Ohio, Tecumseh was raised by an older sister after his father, Chief Puckashinway, was killed at the Battle of Point Pleasant, while his older brother Cheesecow taught him the ways of a Shawnee warrior. Learning to despise white settlers for their brutal attacks on his people, after Cheesecow was killed during a raid into Tennessee, Tecumseh led a band of Shawnee warriors back to Ohio to help Chief Blue Jacket battle the U.S. Army, defeating General Arthur St. Clair at the 1791 Battle of Wabash, only to suffer a resounding Indian defeat at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, where Tecumseh refused to sign the Treaty of Greenville, which led to the forfeiture of Native American lands in the Northwest Territory. By 1805, Tecumseh had become a respected leader amongst the Shawnees of Ohio, until his younger brother Lalawithika had an alcohol-induced vision to lead his people in a war to reclaim their lost lands and culture. In 1808, Lalawithika changed his name to Tenskwakawa, or the Prophet, encouraging Tecumseh to join him at Prophetstown in present-day Indiana, where Tecumseh forged a multi-tribal alliance among Native Americans of the Great Lakes region. Traveling far and wide on recruitment campaigns, Tecumseh delivered powerful speeches, encouraging Native Americans to unite in war to thwart white settlers and resist the white man's corrupted way of life. In 1811, while Tecumseh was away on a recruitment campaign, Indiana Territory Governor and future President William Henry Harrison and his 1,000-man force agreed to wait for Tecumseh's return before attacking Prophetstown. But during the night, Tenskwatawa riled up his warriors for a fight, leading to their defeat at the Battle of Tippecanoe, which effectively ended Tecumseh's hard-won tribal alliance when they abandoned Prophetstown the following day. After the defeat, Tecumseh rallied his remaining forces in support of the British in the War of 1812, playing an instrumental role in the defeat of American forces during the Siege of Detroit. He then joined forces with British Major General Henry Proctor for a planned invasion of Ohio, where Tecumseh skirmished with Harrison and his men. When Harrison invaded Canada, Tecumseh and his warriors were forced into retreat beside the British, until Harrison pursued them into present-day Ontario, leading to an overwhelming British defeat at the Battle of the Thames and Tecumseh's death in battle on October 5, 1813. Tecumseh's death ended all hope of a pan-Indian alliance in the Northwest Territory, leading to the eventual removal of native tribes onto reservations far from their native lands. The Battle of Fallen Timbers. After the British ceded control of the Northwest Territory, following the 1783 signing of the Treaty of Paris, which formally ended the Revolutionary War, the British continued to man their forts in the region, further badgering American settlers in the area by supporting Native American raiding parties. Prior to the Battle of Fallen Timbers, two military expeditions led by Generals Josiah Harmer and Arthur St. Clair failed to end Native American aggression against settlers. In response, in 1792, President George Washington appointed General Anthony Wayne to head a new professional army known as the Legion of the United States. On August 20, 1794, amid a mile-long swatch of fallen trees, toppled by a storm along the Maumee River near present-day Toledo, Ohio, nearly 1,500 native warriors, led by Miami Chief Little Turtle, Shawnee Chief Blue Jacket, and Delaware's Chief Bacangahilas, faced off with Wayne's forces, who used the line of fallen trees as a natural abatis or fortification. Several divisions of Wayne's men broke into retreat during the initial assault by native warriors, until Wayne instructed his aide-de-camp and future American president, Lieutenant William Henry Harrison, to charge the damn rascals with the bayonet. The battle was over in less than an hour and 10 minutes, after the Confederation of Native Warriors fled toward Fort Miami, where British Major William Campbell refused to let them in over his concerns about starting another war with the previously triumphant and now independent United States. Wayne's army lost 33 men, with 100 more wounded, while field reports indicate that some 30 to 40 warriors lay dead along the banks of the river including Ottawa Chief Turkeyfoot and 6 white men fighting on the side of the Native Americans. Roughly 1 year later, formal hostilities ended with the Treaty of Greenville, forcing Native Americans to cede lands to the steady advance of white European American settlers, including present-day Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan, making the Battle of Fallen Timbers yet another painful loss for America's first people